Friends, today we are going to talk about the other parts of tragedy. Till yesterday, we discussed about plot and what Aristotle talks about plot and what Aristotle argues about plot and how he defends himself, defends tragedy and emotions to the allegations laid down by Plato. Now, moving to the other parts of tragedy, it is very much essential to understand that the second most important constituent in understanding of tragedy is character. Character is imitated, and character used to deliver what is said, what is the nature of his choice, and the underlying moral disposition of the person. So, when Aristotle talks about character, he is not talking about the quirks and details of someone's individuality. He is not talking about someone's individuality. He is not talking about the actor, but about the structure of their moral dispositions. So far as it becomes clear through what they say and what they do, because there should not be any disparity in character's behavior. What character is saying and what character is doing, we need to understand this difference very much. And that's why we have to understand the character's role in making tragedy effective. Now, it is not surprising that the first thing Aristotle specifies about character is that the characters should be morally good. This is what the first and foremost thing about character Aristotle is talking. And later on, he added certain qualifications to it. What is the qualification? That they should not be morally bad unnecessarily. Unnecessarily, they should not behave in a bad way. And the example that Aristotle has given is of Euripides' famous play, Orestes. And he gave example of the character of Menelaus in Euripides' play Orestes. Now, Menelaus squirms out of his obligations to offer protection and assistance to his nephew Orestes. Actually, you will find out that Aristotle is following the concept of philos, as we have discussed it in plot and even in the earlier discussions of the different constituents of tragedy. The philos who are always protecting their family members, they have to take care of their family members. So Menelaus, who is having a lots of obligations, offer protection and assistance to his nephew Orestes, and towards whom his obligations and even you can say allegations are particularly strong. Still, he protects his nephew. Now, why Aristotle has chosen this example to mention that characters should be morally good or they should not be morally bad unnecessarily. Now, this unnecessary, the word unnecessary used here. Presumably, in the sense that the plot would have got along perfectly if Menelaus had not been any despicable character. If Menelaus fails to support his nephew because he is having a strong obligations against him, he may be characterized as coward by the critics. That he is coward. That's why he has not supported his nephew. Or because he is self-seeking, he is self-centered. That's why he has not helped his nephew. This might be the assumption about that particular character. And there was no need to make any character coward without any reasons. So Aristotle is not saying that tragedy must be populated only by virtuous persons, virtuous people. As we have seen it when we were discussing about plot, that you cannot expect virtuous persons throughout. And the characters in the play should be virtuous as is possible in the given demands of the plot, what the plot demands. They should be possibly virtuous. Because we, in our real life, also are virtuous. We are possibly as virtuous as possible. But certain circumstances made you to change yourselves. In the same fashion, Aristotle is mentioning that characters should remain as virtuous as possible till the demand of plot is there. You cannot make any character immediately with certain behavior to judge in a wrong way. And that's why when if we look to the example of Shakespearean play Othello, A.C. Bradley in his very famous book Shakespearean tragedy pointed out that we cannot call Iago as a villain. Although Iago is the major source for developing jealousy in the mind of Othello, he was the source, he was the medium. Because what A.C. Bradley argued that Iago has used time in a very proper manner. Have you in your real life, at certain level, at certain moment, experienced certain things? For example, have you not ever tried at your childhood that when a truck full of sugarcane is passing by, you are trying to take sugarcane out of that truck? Children used to do that. Have you not thrown a stone on a tree of mango? If you get a chance to throw a stone, now when you are throwing a stone on a mango tree, shall we say that you are bad, that you are throwing stones? No, that was the moment. You're trying to use that moment. That's why most of the time in an examination hall, when the invigilator is not in the examination hall, you start speaking with each other, although you know that speaking in an examination hall is a wrong or is not the correct way. But still we take a chance. Okay, we speak something. Is it mean that you are not virtuous? You are bad? No. Sometimes human behaves, tries to remain virtuous as long as possible. And that's why Aristotle is saying you cannot have all the virtuous characters, virtuous people coming together in tragedy. They should remain virtuous as long as it is possible, as per the demand of the plot. Now, this requirement, which Aristotle mentioned, must be seen in relation to the comments made earlier in Poetics on the nature of the people involved in the action of tragedy, what sort of people, how people should involved in tragedy. Two passages, particularly relevant in this case. In chapter number 2, where Aristotle talks about object of imitation, and in chapter number 13, when he talk about moral qualities of the people who undergoes a change of fortune. These two chapters talk about the nature of people involved in the action of tragedy. Now, if you remember when we started the discussion of techne and all those 15-20 days back, we find that in chapter number 2, Aristotle contrasted admirable people with inferior people. Admirable or serious, you can say. Because the word used in Greek is spoudios. Spoudios. Yes, Poudios. Spoudios can be translated as admirable or can be translated as serious. This word serious or admirable reappears in the definition of tragedy in chapter number 6 also. What it stated in chapter number 6 in the definition of tragedy, or tragedy is an imitation of an action that is serious, that is admirable. But again, as I said you, when you are talking about any human being, you are saying serious, it gives certain different dimension to that particular person. Because it is tragedy, you are saying serious. What sort of, how will you define a status of a person? Whether that person is serious and that's why you define its status that he is of a good status or having a certain high status. If he is an admirable position, then it has been regarded that he is having certain status in the society because he's been admired by most of the people. Why? Because of his qualities. So spoudios has to be translated as admirable rather than used as serious in the definition of tragedy. What Aristotle means an action involving admirable persons. Why admirable? Because these the persons are better than others. That's why society admires them. And there are very few people who are being admired in the society. Not all the people in the society are admired. We admire very few. This is a very common thing. And that's why Aristotle is saying that action should involve admirable persons, specified as the object of tragic imitation. That is what he said in chapter number 13. They should be admired as an object of imitation. If something happens, if the change in fortune takes place of these kinds of person, people will feel pity and fear for them. If the person is not admirable, if the person is, if you are following the same typical serious translation of word spoudios, then everybody in the society is serious in his behavior. Why don't you feel sad for everyone? You are not sad for everyone. The person to whom you admire, if something happens to that particular person, in that case, we feel very sorry for him. We feel pity for him. So, what he talked about, that tragedy is an imitation of an action that is admirable, action involving admirable persons who are specified as the object of tragic imitation. Like many other terms in Greek, terms of commendation and disparagement, terms like commendation and disparagement in Greek, spoudios and its opposite embrace social status as well as moral qualities. What is mean by spot as? That it embrace social status. It is having social status, certain social status, and having certain moral qualities. That person is admired in the society. That person, what you call serious in the society. And that's why the fortune change of these kinds of person that he explained in chapter number 13 further, that the fortune of these kinds of person, if it changed, then it will reach to its aim, it will reach to its object. Now the person whose fortune changes, whose fortunes change, should be one of those people who are held in great esteem and enjoy great good fortune. They should enjoy great good fortune. They're enjoying almost, they are living in the great good fortune. If they are not living in a great good fortune, then if some change in fortune takes place, then what happens? Nothing will evoke. No audience will be part of that change in fortune. They will not feel anything for this change in fortune. For understanding that there is a change in fortune to evoke pity and fear amongst the audience, it is required that the character who is admirable is enjoying his great good fortune. As Oedipus, you have seen, he is the king. He is enjoying his life. His married life is also good, having three children, looking after the kingdom very well. Everything is well settled. Everything is well defined in the life of Oedipus, that he is enjoying the great good fortune. And then there is change in fortune from good to bad. It requires to give ample time. And the word inferior that Aristotle used in chapter number 15 about the characters. This inferior is clearly stating that it is related with status. Inferior is a term related with status oriented context. This term is almost related to it. Now, there is certain requisition about the characters in tragedy. What Aristotle mentioned, that there need to be good women in tragedy and good slaves. There is no chance for any bad woman in tragedy. There are good women in tragedy and good slave. Even though one of these perhaps having any sort of deficiency, they are deficient, and other, generally speaking, inferior. Certain deficiencies are there in their behavior. In the behavior of woman characters, in the behavior of slave characters. So Aristotle, while making the four requirements of characters, that characters should follow four requirements particularly. And when he's talking about the four requirements of the character, this is the first requirement of the character, that the character should be admirable position, should be in an admirable position. There should be good women, good slave. Perhaps they may have certain deficiencies. They are deficient. And other slave, generally speaking, inferior in social status. Now, one cannot expect, uh, you can say, aristocratic nobility of character, and we cannot expect it from the slave that he should carry, or woman. This slave should carry, or the person from inferior social status should carry the noble aristocratic behavior. We never expect that. That means we are not expecting a sort of aristocratic nobility in the behavior of the character of low status. But they can be morally good in terms of status related norms of behavior. It is not. You cannot say that because he's a slave, he should not behave morally good. Because when you are saying you require a character or slave who is good. Now, if he is inferior, his social status is inferior, but his moral is good. He is behaving good. So you cannot say that a slave cannot be like this. A slave can be good slave, loyal to his master, hardworking slave. And in tragedy, he should be like this. That is what Aristotle is mentioning. That a slave should be good slave. A woman should be good woman in tragedy. She should not be bad woman in tragedy. Again, the definition of good and bad, as I said, it depends on your moral, how you are morally behaving in the whole sequence of actions. And you will find that generally in any sort of tragedy, the women are not behaving in a bad way. In tragedy, women are always good, slaves are always good. That is the first requirement. The main character, the hero, is admirable. Woman should be good, slave should be good. The idea of good is morally good, not about their social status. But when you are talking about social status of the hero, he should be social status should be admirable social status. And the main hero or the protagonist, he should enjoy the great good fortunes. He's enjoying great good fortunes in his life. This is the first requirement of Aristotle when he talks about characters. Now, by contrast, if you see very carefully and minutely, the slaves in comedy, the slaves in comedy, whatever their virtues may be, whether they are morally good or morally bad, but the slaves in comedies are lazy. They are likely to be disobedient, dishonest, self seeking. These are the characteristics of a slave in comedy. But in tragedy, he should be exactly opposite to this. Conversely, high status characters, characters who are on higher status, such as Menelaus, who is not king but is aristocrat. The high status characters can be morally bad. High status characters can be morally bad. Tragedy, therefore, is essentially concerned with the people who are of high status. Please understand this. Tragedy is essentially concerned with people who are of high status and of good moral character. There will be peripheral figures. The hero is in the center and other characters surrounding the hero. The peripheral figures, slaves and servants and so forth, people of lower status. These people cannot be at the center of the tragedy's interest. They cannot come into the center. They cannot become the part of the tragedy. Please understand this. For the sake of tragedy's interest, these people cannot enter into the center. They cannot be part of that center. They will be on the periphery. And they should be at least be good of their kind. These people should be good in their behavior, although they are not becoming part of tragedy. Tragedy is not of these low status people. Tragedy is only of one person. And that's why you will find out up to modern tragedy, as we have discussed this thing in the last year's offline lectures of drama. Tragedy is usually of the hero, not of all the persons into the play. Tragedy is of Hamlet's, tragedy is of Othello, tragedies of Macbeth, tragedies of Lear, tragedies of Oedipus, tragedies of Orestes, tragedies of various heroes, Tamburlaine. Tragedy is not of all these slaves who are on the periphery. And other than hero, the high status characters, look out how he is defining each and every character in the play, in the tragedy. The hero should be of high status and good moral character, enjoying his good fortune. It is the condition. You should not say that now he will get good fortune and then this good fortune will change into bad fortune. No. He is already enjoying his good fortune. He is having a, although he is enjoying his good fortune, he is morally very good. He is of high status. He is very serious, admirable person in the society. This is what the character is. The main protagonist, the hero in our common language. And rest of the characters, women, they should be good, morally good. Slaves and characters of lower status, they are always will remain on the periphery. They will not be the part of that tragedy. Tragedy will happen of the person who is enjoying his great good fortune, living in a high status, admirable position, following an aristocratic nobility with him. So tragedy will take place of that person only, not of the slaves who are on the periphery. They are not allowed to enter inside the ring. They are not part of the center. They are always remain on periphery, although they are of a lower status, but they should be good in their kind. The third type of characters in tragedy, persons of high status. Persons of high status, they should be or they can be morally bad. Rest of the persons of high status, they should be morally bad. But if they are not meant, they are not meant to be the focus of our pity. That is what the poet has to define. That is what the dramatist has to define. Persons of high status, people from high status, high class, aristocrats, nobles, they can be morally bad, but they should not be, or they are not meant to be, the part of our pity. We should not feel pity for these aristocratic people. We should feel pity only for the hero of the play who is of high status. And they will be the part of action, and they should play their role, they should extend their work if the plot requires. Otherwise, they should not extend their work. They should not exceed themselves. There are limitations. So, if you see very carefully, in the first requirement of the characters, Aristotle has drawn certain lines that these characters cannot move across. They have to behave in their own defined line. They cannot cross the line. If they cross the line, then the tragedy will not reach to its objective. They should, it is a defined structure. How hero should be, how slave should be, how woman should be, how people of higher status should be, how should they behave, that it should not reach to the level of pity and fear, that audience should feel pity for that high status character who is morally bad, or he should not extend himself more than his limit. He should be within his own limit. He should not exceed beyond that. This is what Aristotle defines the first requirement of characters. Now, the second requirement of Aristotle's four requirements for character is appropriateness. Second requirement is appropriateness. The first requirement is the defined structure of character's behavior. Second is appropriateness. This appropriateness is very close to the idea of character being good of its kind, which Aristotle has applied this to the persons of lower status also. Characters, they should be good. Now, a woman in a tragedy should be a good woman only. This is what appropriateness means by. She should have virtues appropriate to a woman, and only those virtues which are appropriate to women should be part of this woman's behavior in tragedy. So there should be appropriateness. They should not go beyond this. And that's why Aristotle is pointing out that there should be, the woman should be virtuous, and virtuousness of a woman is defined by the society itself. In a patriarchal society, what is the definition of a virtuous woman? How will you define a virtuous woman in patriarchal society? Patriarchal society has defined the role of women very carefully. That the woman should not be part of external affairs of her own husband. She should only look after her husband's goodness throughout her life. She should not go beyond her husband's say. Whatever her husband is doing, he is doing good for her only. This virtuous woman cannot go beyond her husband's saying. And that's why the, the woman in tragedy is not going beyond the hero's word. She is not having her own say. She is not having her own arguments. She should follow her husband. She should follow the hero of the play. And that's why you will find out in every tragedy, whatever women characters are there, all these women characters are good in their behavior because they are following the norms of virtuosity as defined by the society. And that's why appropriateness. If he is a slave, there are rules and regulations for the slave to behave. That means what he talked about in the first requirement of the characters, that they should be well defined. But when they are well defined, they should be appropriate. That whatever you have defined, they are appropriate to that particular definition. They are not going beyond that definition. And Aristotle is talking about that appropriateness in as the second requirement of characters. Now, instead of going to the third requirement, we will go for the fourth requirement first, and then we will discuss the third requirement. The fourth requirement is straightforward. That is, characters should be consistent in their behavior. Straightforward characters. The characters should be consistent. They should not leave their track. They are not allowed to. Whatever situations may arrive, whatever conditions are there, they are not allowed to leave their place. They should be straightforward. They should be consistent. This obviously follows from the requirement of necessary or probable connection. They should be following the requirement of necessity and probability. That what we are talking about when we are talking about plot. The phrase probable or necessary that we are discussing right from the beginning, that the characters should follow the necessary or probable connections that are required in a tragedy. They should be linking. If someone in a tragedy acts inconsistently and unpredictable, what will happen? Is there any chance to behave like this in tragedy? That you are behaving inconsistent and you are unpredictable? Then one cannot say that what they do follows the necessarily or probably what has gone before. Because you know it very well, when we discussed about plot, we know that there are certain offstage activities which are not taking place or which are not having any chance to be the part of this action that is going on the stage. But these offstage activities are essential to carry on this particular stage. If the character is not straightforward, if he is inconsistent, if he is unpredictable, then how do you know that what he did before is the reflexive action of that particular thing? We need to understand this particular fact, that what they do follows necessarily or probably what has gone before. Something has happened before. That's why the reaction is here in the form of action now. Now, you cannot find out, you cannot say that the characters are inconsistent. No, the consistency is the necessity format of any character's behavior in the tragedy. As we know, there are exceptions to every rule. There is only one exception for this rule, for this requirement. And the one exception is where we have been led to expect someone to behave unpredictably. The action will lead us to predict that he behaved unpredictably. There is an audience, I felt that, okay, this should not be done by this particular person, but he did it. It is unpredictable today. Why he is behaving unpredictably? Because he is shown as mentally disturbed or emotionally unstable, or he is facing some sort of irresolvable dilemma. And that's why this particular character is behaving unpredictably in the play. This is the only exception you can have. That if the character is mentally or emotionally unstable, or you can say he's facing such type of dilemma which he cannot able to solve it, and that's why he's behaving unpredictably. But this is the condition of the character which is stated to you earlier. That's why his unpredictable behavior is also consistent throughout the play, and that's why they are consistently inconsistent. And that's why Aristotle is saying that the character should be consistent. If he is behaving unpredictably, now this unpredictable behavior should be continuous in his play. Consistency. First is defined position of characters. Second is appropriateness. Fourth is consistency. If the character is consistent, then and then it is possible for us to reach to the object of tragedy. Okay. The third requirement, which is more little bit difficult, that what why it is difficult and how it is going to be resolved. We'll talk it in tomorrow's lecture. That the third requirement is little bit of difficult to understand. And that's why I have told you the three requirements which are very easy to remember, to recognize. The first requirement is that the character should be admirable. The admirable. What is the condition of admirable? We have discussed it very carefully, and that's why you will find out, my friend, that what should be the status of the character and how he should behave. The definition, the well defined character is the first requirement. Second requirement, as per their well defined status, they should behave appropriately, and the appropriate behavior should be consistent in the play. So, these are the three requirements that we discussed today when it talks about character of any tragedy. The third requirement, which is little bit, which is more difficult to understand, because the term, one term, homoios, HOMOIOS, means like, like, because Aristotle says that characters should be like. What is that like? What like? What it means by like? We are going to discuss that thing in tomorrow's chapter. I hope that you would remember all these three requirements of character, and we'll move for the fourth requirement in tomorrow's lecture.